Mhairi Ross is a paramedic from Wick who recently, along with her partner Alan, made an extraordinary attempt to row unsupported round the coast of Britain. During the course of this row, they recorded a podcast called The Long Row Home, and on it, Mhairi shared this.
Oh, sorry, I'm struggling to speak at the moment. It's been some really difficult times over the last few years, and just over 2.5 years ago I thought the world would be a better place without me, and it's absolutely astounding to see the support and the positivity that we're getting now, and I never ever believed in my life that I would be in that position of a real privilege to know that everyone's talking about us in a positive light. And yeah, this is hard work rowing, and it's hard graft getting on the oars and setting it out an anchor, but it's not nearly as difficult as trying to get out of your bed. You're in the depths of a depression, and I'm one of the really lucky ones. I got the help and support from the right people at the right time. And I don't want this journey to be about negativity. It really is about the journey of recovery, and I think we are showing that it's possible to recover from depression, but it does take time, and it takes hard work, and it takes effort.
So I wanted to talk to Mhairi about that. What led her to wanting to end her life in the first place, and what that hard work and effort involved in order to recover. This is Speaking of Suicide, and as always, we're likely to go into some difficult territory, so if you need to, do press pause and get some support. You'll find all the details from Mikey's line in the show notes. I'm Penny Stewart, and with me for this episode is Mhairi Ross. Good to meet you and actually see you face to face. We've tried to see each other a few times.
Yeah, it's nice to finally catch up.
You're not long back from that remarkable row, Mhairi, but explain, what was the ambition? What were you attempting to do?
So we were attempting to be the first mixed pair to do an unsupported row around Great Britain, which meant that once we left the dry land, we weren't able to touch land or accept provisions from anyone. So we were hoping to do it initially in 60 days, but 60 days became 70, and then 70 became 80, and then the weather forecast was just against us, so we had to, on the grounds of safety, we had to stop, unfortunately.
So you set off from Wick, and then unsupported means what? Set off from Wick and you were going clockwise round the UK. It was clockwise, wasn't it? It was clockwise. But what does unsupported mean?
So it meant that everything we needed for the duration of the journey was on board the boat already. So all our food, our snacks, anything we needed was on board, and our water was made using a desalinator unit. So we were relying on sunshine to charge the solar panels, to charge the batteries, to charge our electronics and our water maker. In summer of 2024, there was a distinct lack of sunshine. So yeah, everything we needed was on that boat, and nothing, we couldn't accept even a chocolate bar from a passerby.
Wow. Why? Why did you decide to do this? Who was, and what was it in aid of?
So we did it for charity, but it came about as I'd been really quite ill a few years ago, mentally and physically. And whilst I was in hospital recovering from pneumonia, somebody asked me would I like to row across the Atlantic. And I thought,
as you do.
Well, especially since the consultant had said to me that day I could forget any thoughts of doing endurance sports in the future. So maybe me, I decided that yes, it seemed like a great idea, and it was something to concentrate my recovery on, both physically and mentally, because I would have to work towards recovery mentally and physically. But unfortunately, the plans for the Atlantic row all fell through, and to cut a long story short, I was offered a place potentially as a replacement on a reserve place on another boat trip that was doing around the UK. And Alan says, well, I quite fancy doing it too. So we decided, he says, I don't want to do it as part of a bigger team. I just want to do it, you and me. So that's where it came from.
Wow. Sounds like something that had the potential to be really quite intense. You know, as a couple, you're getting on a relatively small boat, a boat that's small enough to be rowing it anyway and kind of powered just by yourselves. How tough was it mentally?
Oh, it was extraordinarily tough. And I think it was probably mentally harder than physical. Don't get me wrong, it was physically very hard at times, but it was mind over matter sometimes. You just had to dig really deep mentally, for me anyway. I think my mental steam was going to run out before my physical steam would have.
So with that in mind, it seems fairly extraordinary to think that, as you said on the Long Row Home podcast, only 2.5 years ago, you were feeling anything but mentally tough. So maybe let's roll the clock back a bit, because it seems amazing that you went from that point to the point of this huge challenge. When and how did things become mentally tough?
So I think initially I went through a period of time where there was lots of big changes in my life. But the main one was I lost my mum very suddenly. And then 3 months later, I lost my auntie, who was my second confidant. So I lost everyone, not everyone, but I lost my 2 support networks. And there was other things going on in life as well, but I kept going and kept going. Because in between, I'd been made redundant. So I'd started a new job in a new place. COVID came and everything just kind of started piling up around me. And I just got to a point where I was like, I just felt that the world would be a better place without me. I was really struggling. But I kept going and kept getting sicker.
I think loss is such a big factor in so many of the people that we talk to for this podcast. But it sounds like it wasn't just the dreadful loss, by the sounds of it, of your mum and your aunt, but if you lost your job as well, that can have a huge impact, particularly on how we feel about ourselves. Was that quite a significant factor in all this?
It probably was, but at the time I didn't really think it was. Because there was other loss going on round about that as well. I'd lost my grandparents at the same time, a horse, and my house got destroyed. I lost a lot of my personal belongings, and there was just so much going on that, like, being made redundant was just a tiny little piece of the jigsaw. And even then I was like, right, I can bounce back, I can do this, I can keep going.
In terms of how you were feeling, what form did all this take? How did it present? How did you realise how bad you were feeling?
I think it was only after my mum passed away and I sat down after the funeral and I took 5 minutes out for myself that I just realised that my life was just in a place that I just didn't want it to be at that time. Because even I was doing all the things that you're meant to do for your mental health, eating healthy, out exercising, but even my exercise became a turmoil because I'd be out riding my bike and I'd look into the woods and say, well, if I didn't come out, nobody would care. So I kind of even lost there as well, because the things I really enjoyed doing became unenjoyable and exhausting, because I was just fighting this little chip on my shoulder all the time saying, nobody cares. You're a waster, you've lost it, nobody even... So it was really difficult. It was just...
Yeah, I can appreciate it. It can feel really disheartening if we think we're doing all the things that, quite often you go and see a doctor and they say, well, do exercise and eat well and all these kind of things. And you think, well, I'm doing all this stuff, but I'm not feeling any better.
Yeah, it helped, certainly helped me initially, but then it stopped helping. It became unhelpful because it was just putting extra pressure on me that I just didn't need at the time.
Were you able to share any of this, either with Alan, your partner, or with your colleagues at work? Because I know you ended up going back to new kind of work.
I didn't share it with anyone because I was scared of what people would think. I was always meant to be the strong one, the one that people came to, and I was ashamed to say that I wasn't coping.
That idea of strengths is interesting because you're clearly, massively physically and mentally strong, but we can often, I think, associate strength with holding it all in.
Yeah, and actually it's the opposite. It's being able to talk to somebody that's as strong, like overcoming that fear of speaking to somebody. And if one thing comes out of this podcast today, it is please speak to somebody sooner rather than later. Don't struggle on. Just even if it's to your friend or somebody, just say something to someone because people will listen.
What were you afraid that people would think of you?
I was scared that people would judge me for being weak and not being able to cope, and yeah, I wasn't coping, but I wasn't coping for those reasons. I was not coping because there was a chemical imbalance in my brain and my filing cabinet was full and overflowing and bursting at the seams with everything that had gone on because I just hadn't addressed anything. I just kept going and kept going and kept going. And yeah, that's not the way to deal with things. I've learnt the hard way.
You're a paramedic. Were you in that line of work at the time, and were you worried about being, judged even within an environment which is about taking care of people?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to say that stigma's not there, but stigma unfortunately is still there. And I was a nurse for 20 years before I became a paramedic, so it's not like I've not been in healthcare. And yeah, even I was scared to speak up because of what some people might say or think of me. I don't know if part of that was because I was in a relatively new working environment at the time. But it actually turns out the vast majority were very, very supportive when it all collapsed around me, and they were there for me, and so I perceived that wrong.
Let's touch on for a moment about when it all came to an absolute head. You said that, just 2.5 years ago you didn't want to be around anymore. If you don't mind me asking, did you contemplate taking your life?
I did contemplate taking my life, but I still had enough of a feeling that I was scared of what I would leave behind. Not for me, but I was scared that somebody else would find me and that would impact on their life in a really negative way. So I still had enough, I don't know what the word is, it's not sense because it's not a common sense thing yet, but I still had enough in me that I was scared that if I took my life, somebody else would find me and have to live with that for the rest of their life. And that was what stopped me, that fear, because I've been in positions where I've been at suicides, unfortunately, and they leave their mark on everyone around you, and I was petrified that I would leave that thought with somebody that I loved.
If you or someone you know needs help and you're listening to this and it's difficult, don't forget you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55 or contact them via Messenger, web chat and WhatsApp, and the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. Well, Mhairi, thankfully you didn't take that next step, but how did you manage to step back from that? You obviously had that feeling that you wouldn't want to put anyone else through that upset of finding you, but how did you actually get help? How did things change?
So everything came to a head one night, and fortunately the right person asked me, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And I just broke down. And I ended up getting help very, very quickly. I engaged in CBT therapy, and I was incredibly lucky that I literally fell into the right path with the right person at the right time. And I really appreciate that that doesn't happen for everyone, and some people have extended waits to start therapy, whereas I was so fortunate that I was picked up right at that moment of crisis. My help started. So I went through a period of CBT. I worked incredibly hard at my CBT to change my thoughts and process. I was compliant with medication that was prescribed, even though I was really reluctant initially to take medication. And then somebody said to me, "Why are you so reluctant to take it? If I prescribed you an antibiotic, would you take it without question?" And I says, "Well, probably." And they said, "Well, what's different?" I said, "It's an antidepressant. It's just working, it's fixing the chemical imbalance in your brain that's causing this. It's not something that you've chosen, or it's not a lifestyle choice. It's there's a chemical imbalance. So that all that antidepressant is going to do is help with that imbalance." So even myself, I had a stigma about taking an antidepressant because I just didn't want to. But actually, once somebody explained it like that, I was like, "Yeah, just comply and take them." So, yeah.
And how, once you'd started opening up about how difficult things were, how did it become easier to talk to Alan and other colleagues once you'd kind of admitted? How did that then kind of roll on?
It definitely became easier because I realised that they were really hurt that I hadn't, well, Alan especially was really hurt that I hadn't trusted in them and things. But initially I was scared that he would run away. I was scared that he would leave, and another relationship would break down and another loss would happen. But I got that wrong because he was there, and in the future I would talk to him about mental health and things. And I know which ones of my colleagues that I can speak to, and I really learnt who my friends were. And some people really surprised me in that they were the ones that were there. And I kind of learnt that if somebody wasn't interested in me as a person, that don't waste my time and energy on them. Concentrate on the people that actually want you in their life, because they're the positive influences and they're the ones that will help keep you on that path to recovery.
Sounds like you did a lot of work to recover. You worked hard at all of this. So how long did it take before you started feeling better, before you could think, actually, I'm turning a corner here?
Oh, it was months. Absolutely, it was months. Because even though I'd made the decision about the Rowan things, I was still feeling really anxious if I went out in public, and because I'd had pneumonia as well, I lost that physical crutch as well. So I wasn't able to exercise properly for months. So I'd say probably about 6 months, and that's when things, because even when I first went back to work, even though I was feeling better, I still wasn't feeling 100%. There was still work to be done and kind of hurdles to cross. But my own hurdles I'd probably put in place about people's perceptions of me, and is she not going to cope when we get this, and we're not going to, and things. And I still have bad days, but those bad days I will speak to somebody now. I won't, and I'll seek help. If I've had a bad job at work, I'll go and speak to somebody about it instead of bottling it up and thinking, right, on with the next one. I don't need to be heroic. I just need to look after myself.
Did it take quite a while? Or I'm wondering if it took quite a while for that perception of how you thought people would think of you, for the stigma that you thought was there. I mean, did it take a while for that to shift? How quickly did you realise that you weren't going to lose your job, you weren't going to lose your relationship, that actually things were not as you'd been seeing them?
Probably quite quickly.
Yeah.
For the big things, and then there were still littler things that were bothering me that probably shouldn't have been bothering me. But that is the nature of depression. You are going to be worried about what people think, what you're doing, and it would be brilliant if we had a magic pill that we could just cure the illness. Because everyone suffers from mental health of some description. You've got people who have got really good mental health and people who've got really poor mental health, and we all fall on that scale somewhere. And some people will be incredibly lucky and have good mental health all their life, like their physical health, they'll have good physical health. But other people, unfortunately, will have episodes of poor mental health. But we can always improve our mental health.
Do you think? I mean, you've worked in the care profession as a nurse, a paramedic, over a long period of time. Do you think experiencing this very difficult patch has changed how you are as a health professional?
It definitely makes me more empathetic to people with anxieties and mental health problems, because I can kind of put myself in, everyone's shoes are different, and that's why I don't want to say I can put myself in their shoes, because I can't. But I can empathise with them because I've had a pair of shoes that didn't quite fit properly for myself before. So it's easier to engage. And I'm not scared to ask somebody that question now, because I was crying out for somebody to ask me the question, are you okay? And have you thought about taking your life? Because it actually felt a relief to say to something, yes, I have. And just because you ask that question of somebody doesn't mean to say that you're going to plant that seed in their head. It's either there or it's not there already. And you're not going to encourage somebody by asking them, do you feel suicidal? You're just going to, if you can listen to them and say, right, I'll come to the doctors with you, or what can I do to help you? Ask the question. Don't be scared to ask the question either.
I find it truly amazing, Mhairi, that against the backdrop of all of this, that it really wasn't that long ago that you were in that place and then you embarked on this incredible challenge. How worried were you about your mental health going into this very intense, challenging, difficult experience of the row?
I was really worried. I thought it was a great idea, but then I was also, what happens if we don't finish? What happens if Al and myself have a massive fallout? It was possible. We were stuck in a tiny little space with not really anybody else to communicate with for weeks, months as it turned out. But yeah, there was a lot of variables in the role that could have really affected my mental health. I did speak to the same lady that did my CBT. I spoke to her before we went because she'd actually asked to have a conversation about it, because she's like, where are you going to go from after this role and what's going to happen? So actually before we went on the role, I had strategic plans in place for dealing with my mental health. And actually on the role, I turned round to Alan and I said to him, I don't actually know now what's worse for my mental health, finishing this role or stopping right now, because I was on that slippery slope, standing at the top of the cliff, thinking, I can't do it. I can't blow the oars one more time. But you know what? I had the conversation and I felt so much better after it. And the decision was taken out of her hands anyway because of the weather, so I didn't have to make that decision. But I think part of that was I knew the weather was coming. I knew that we were going to really struggle to finish, but we were still trying to make as much progress as possible, and that was really difficult, knowing that you were probably going to be stopping in 2 or 3 days' time. You're like, why are we doing it? And you're like that. Doing it because we're raising a lot of money for charity and thousands of people are behind us right now. So yeah, there was a time in the road where I thought, I'm getting sick again. But it wasn't, it was just tired and emotional. But it did cross my mind. And it was a conversation that was had that I was like, I really don't know what to do for the best now.
I wonder what you think are the key things that gave you the resilience and ability to take all this on, even though you knew that it, in a sense, came with, I want to say dangers. I suppose I do mean dangers to your mental health. It was going to be really, really tough. So what gave you the resilience? What gave you the ability to get through this and not slide right back down?
I think because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it still. I wanted the challenge. I probably wanted to test myself. I just wanted to do something completely different. But once I get an idea, that's it. You're not going to change that idea. So I'm pretty stubborn, and I didn't want to change the way that I live my life completely just because I might get sick in the future. It was a chance I took. But I prepared, so we spent a huge amount of time physically training for this. I spent a huge amount of time mentally training as well.
That's interesting.
So I think if I'd gone into it blindly saying, I'll be fine, I would have been lying to everyone, including myself. So yeah, I used my coping strategies. There was times where I had to use where I felt quite anxious on the road, I felt like we were in danger. So I just had to focus on the calming right down, using the breathing. So things that I thought I'd probably never use outside of feeling anxious and things. I don't know how to say this, but outside of like therapy and practicing for things like that, they actually just kicked right in when I needed them to kick in because of...
Almost like a trained muscle.
Yeah.
But of the mental kind.
Yeah, that's absolutely... It was just like right, feeling anxious, you need to calm down because it's not helping anyone being anxious, and you can't get off this boat right now because there is nowhere to go. So just concentrate on what you need to do. And so fortunately it kicked in.
And I think the other thing that sounds to be so significant was actually having a voice and using it when things got tough and sharing it. And you didn't just share it with Alan. In effect, you also shared it through recording the podcast and, which was almost daily updates on how you were feeling. And you were very honest in that too. So you definitely sounded to have found a voice to voice how you were feeling.
Yeah, and it was probably quite... because a lot of people didn't know my story and they didn't know that I'd been where I'd been. I think people knew that I hadn't been well, but I don't think nobody really realised just how unwell I'd been feeling. And it was very easy to share it because I wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. I was just talking away on a microphone. So, but everyone was saying we were away, oh, you're heroes, how are you doing it physically? And I was like, and as I said in that podcast, it was the physical side. It was dead easy in comparison to get out of your bed when you've got depression. And if your challenge is to get out of bed and get dressed, face that challenge and then look to the next one. Because a couple of years ago, getting out of my bed and out of my pyjamas was challenging enough for the day. I would have stayed in my bed all day, every day if I could have.
Has all this changed how you feel about yourself? How you view yourself?
It probably has, because it's just reinforced that actually I am a strong person and I can cope with what's thrown at me. I just maybe have to deal with it in a slightly different way or a largely different way from what I'm used to. So now I will take time out, I'll do a bit of self-care. I'm not as good at it as I should be, but yeah, I'm very aware that I just need to put myself first sometimes, which is difficult as well. But yeah, just taking that, even if it's 5 minutes a day, just time out to sit and reflect or have a conversation with somebody. Yeah.
Mhairi, I know it's not been easy having this conversation today. Before we started recording, you said, I don't like talking. And I thought, oh, bless you, and I'm going to put you through the ringers. But I hope you're proud of both what you achieved in rowing with Alan, which was extraordinary. You got from Wick all the way round to Tobermory in the most amazing and difficult circumstances. So one, proud of that. But two, I hope you're proud of just how far you've come mentally and the fact that you've had the strength to sit and do this today.
As I say, if I can just make a difference to one person, hopefully more than one, about coming forward and talking, it makes my discomfort for the length of however long we've been talking worthwhile, because that's what I want to do at the end of the day, make a difference.
Well, thank you. If you're listening to this and want to hear more about Mhairi and Alan's remarkable journey, you can find a link to the Long Row Home podcast in the show notes. Now, here's Shona from Mikey's Line with a few thoughts to take away from my conversation with Mhairi today.
What a strong woman Mhairi is, and what a great story. Mhairi was sharing that a protective factor for her in not attempting suicide was her fear of the impact finding her would have on somebody else. And I think for people in the frontline services, this is a strong protective factor. The other thing that really stood out for me is we often talk about the importance of asking if someone is okay, if they're feeling suicidal, ask twice. But I found Mhairi's account brought the importance of asking this question to life. It kind of took those words away from being a social media post or a suicide prevention training message to words that saved her life. She said, everything came to a head one night, and then fortunately the right person asked me, are you okay? What's wrong? And she said she broke down and ended up getting help very quickly. And she said later that she's not afraid to ask the question because she was actually crying out for someone to ask her this question. So, and then she just reminds us also that asking this question doesn't put the idea into somebody's head. It's there or it's not there, but it's not going to encourage somebody to attempt suicide if we ask it. On the contrary, it can save a life, as it did with Mhairi. So that's what I just want to put a line under. Please, can we keep checking in on our friends and asking if they are okay?
A huge thanks to Shona and of course all the team at Mikey's Line for the work they do. Don't forget, if you need someone to talk to or some help, then you can text Mikey's Line on 07786 20 77 55, or you can contact them via Messenger, web chat or WhatsApp, and the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. Or you can go and visit them, of course, at The Hive, 4 Strothers Lane, Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m, and all those details and links are in the show notes. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line. This episode was sponsored by McDonald's in the community, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.
I'm Alan Nip.
And I'm Mhairi Ross.
And we're known as Stormy and Steth.
Right now we're in the middle of an extraordinary journey.
We're on a world record attempt to circumnavigate Great Britain by rowing boat.
completely unassisted and without coming into land.
It's just us, our 7-metre long carbon fibre boat, Bodicea, and 2,000 nautical miles of sea.
It's all about pushing boundaries and testing our personal limits to the full.
And trust me, it's already testing us. We're doing it to raise money for 2 incredible charities, the RNLI and the SCA, Scottish Charity Air Ambulance.
We're hoping to raise £30,000 and complete the trip in just 60 days.
And you can join us for regular updates in the Long Row Home podcast.
The Long Row Home podcast. Listen, rate it, share it, wherever you get your podcasts.